Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Contact Report 280.
Since 1903, anti-Semitic neo-Nazi groups, organizations, individual fanatics, and other anti-Jewish circles have officially been working around with the so-called Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, which are ascribed to Jewish Zionist circles or wise men. Since then, they have given and continue to give rise to persecution and hatred of the Jews. But what really corresponds to the truth with regard to these protocols? In a few words, as the Plejadiers Pleiaren explain, it is a tremendous work of lies, an incredibly bad forgery or plagiarism, which originated from earlier novels, which were written after the middle of the 19th century. According to the Plejadisch Pleiaranischen data, the highest boss of the Russian Secret Service in Paris, Pyotr Rachkovsky, created from it in the years 1897-98 the final version of the slanderous work, which was published then for the first time in the year 1903 in Russia in the magazine Znamia the Banner, with the lying claim that the protocol is genuine. The actual dissemination of the protocol, however, did not take place until 1919, quite explosively as the work of Russian opponents of the 1917 revolution. The intention was undoubtedly to turn anti-Semitism into a weapon against Bolshevism by publishing the alleged protocols. In NSDAP Germany, the protocols were then adopted, brought here and introduced by a Ukrainian officer and fighter against the Russian Revolution, named Fyodor Winberg, living in exile in Germany. The slanderous work is still in circulation today and continues to cause racist damage, claiming that the Jews created a secret world government and hoarded all the gold. The wise men of Zion and the Jewish people are to blame for wars and political and economic crises, etc. Such slanderous allegations exist in many variations of protocols, which of course is a found food for anti-Semitic Nazi and other right-wing extremist racist circles. Today, the anti-Semitic neo-Nazi and other racist and right-wing extremist circles are using all governments and high-ranking government figures as well as all banks and their bosses, first and foremost the Rothschilds and the business magnates, etc., in the slanderous machinations of the protocols in order to stir up hatred, especially against the Jewish world and its alleged world government. During the Nazi era, the anti-Semitic inflammatory writing, Protokolle der Weisen von Zion, Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, was spread by the Nazis with proclamations and cheers, not only in Germany, but also wherever Nazis were active in other countries. In Switzerland, these were the frontler who circulated the lie protocols when Adolf Hitler finally seized power in Germany in the spring of 1933. This led the Jewish organizations in Switzerland to take legal action against the defamatory protocols at the Bern District Court. The trial attracted worldwide attention, and it was made clear that the alleged protocols were a forgery or a work of lies. Unfortunately, a few years later, the verdict was trivialized and, so to speak, overturned again by the Supreme Court, which meant that the lies and slander against the Jews were once again outlawed. The protocols of the wise men of Zion are nothing other than lies, deception, and deception in truly international criminal form. They are a tremendously slanderous work of irresponsible, criminal anti-Semites, an evil work of genocide and insult to the people, with which Adolf Hitler and his henchmen also functioned, and which contributed immensely to the fact that in Hitler's Nazi empire, millions of innocent Jews, and also of people of other races and of other faiths, men, women and children were tortured, and handed over terrible deaths.
Contact Report 445.
Book works and writings such as the so-called Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion are the worst slanderous works. They are invented conspiracies for the purpose of slandering, persecuting, and destroying the people of the Jewish faith. Virtually all writings and books of this kind bear witness to a confused Nazi, political, extreme right-wing, and religious fanaticism of the most degenerate kind, generally aimed at denigrating the Jewish faithful and fomenting hatred for Jews and the destruction of Israel. The Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion are based on a malicious forgery, which is the basis of modern anti-Semitism. This forgery circulates under various names, but the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the best known and most enduring document of modern international anti-Semitism. The term forgery must be used with the utmost caution, however, because it is in no way appropriate for this case, because there is no genuine original, because, in the sense of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it was not a Jewish wise man who produced such a document. But a forgery would be that a genuine document would have had to be fraudulently reproduced as closely as possible to the original in order to pass it off as genuine. With regard to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, however, there has never been a real original that could have been copied, but it was from the very beginning a pure and smooth invention or a freely found fiction without any truth content. If we dispense with a few half or incomprehensible allusions to French or Russian politics at the turn of the century, the protocol fiction lacks any reference to reality. In fact, it should be possible to think that every reasonable and unprejudiced person should have noticed the absurd, frivolous, and fantastic nature of the text of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion from the very beginning, because the whole thing is extremely badly written and full of extremely tiring repetitions, with no recognizable and logical structure, except for a rough three-theme sequence in relation to liberalism. This is supposed to correspond to the intention of Judaism to seize world domination and create a utopian empire under an absolutist Jewish monarchy. Otherwise, the discourse is lost in contemporary historical jugglery and economic whims. The tiresome repetitions are to be seen purely from a psychological point of view, because through constant repetition man learns, or rather, drops fill the glass. Because through the endless repetitions the whole thing hammers itself in, whereby man, just like when learning through constant repetition, memorizes everything. In the case of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, however, everything is hammered in by the tiring repetitions, in such a way that it evokes thoughts of fear and feelings of anxiety, and thus, involuntarily, the delusion of a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world and mankind.
Contact Report 520.
Already at the 280th Contact Conversation on the 3rd of March 2000, and at the 445th of the 8th of March 2007, we talked about the falsified Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, which are based on malicious lies and slander and have conjured up dramatic events. Basically, this work of lies and slander, created at the beginning of the 20th century, can be traced back to the Russian Secret Service. Lying and slanderous, this book claims that a secret world conspiracy has been uncovered, which originated with Judaism and had the aim of achieving world domination. This is to be achieved through capitalism and with the help of Freemasons and communism. These alleged Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion were processed into a book that sold like hot cakes and was considered to be the undeniable truth, and is also still considered to be the real truth by all conspiracy believers today. This did not and does not leave the believers in this forgery in any doubt. Although shortly after the book was published, it could be proven beyond doubt that it was a common forgery, intended to malign and discredit the entire Jewish world and to incite an inflammatory hunt against the widespread Jewish people. The evidence was of no use, however, because after the book had been sold, it was too late to be able to satisfy the truth about the forger's file, which was the false Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion. The whole thing was printed and sold en masse in the 20th century as a lying and slanderous smear book in large editions. And Germany in particular was literally flooded with it and also became a basic work for Adolf Hitler and for the Nazis, whose anti-Jewish propaganda was based on this slanderous work. Hitler, who himself was partly of Jewish descent, took the false protocols and used them to fulfill his lust for power, for his criminal work and to trigger the Second World War. With the help of the falsified protocols of the wise men of Zion, he incited himself and the German population against the Jews, finding particularly diligent supporters for his anti-Jewish propaganda among those who glorified him and with whom he was able to build up the Nazi system. And it is a fact that Adolf Hitler's plans for world conquest, which were criminal to humanity, were only discovered through the wrong protocols, with the old Thule Society supporting him in his mania for war and world domination. Only through this it was also possible, against false chroniclers and false factual experts in the matter of Adolf Hitler, etc., that this fanatical and insane criminal of humanity could lead the world into the Second World War and the Holocaust. But fanatics and lunatics in the matter of Jew hatred existed and exist in many countries on earth, whereby nowadays, especially the neo-Nazis in Germany, Russia, and the USA have to be mentioned. But even before the Second World War, the USA made a big name for itself in terms of hatred of Jews as a result of the book of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, whereby the automobile giant Henry Ford stood out in particular, who had malicious and hateful inflammatory writings against Judaism printed in huge editions and spread them everywhere. Osama bin Laden regarded the false protocols as the truth and built his anti-Semitic hatred on them, which he then extended to the USA and the Christian world as well.
Contact Report 672 20th Century Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion. The protocols pretend to be secret documents of Jewish world conspirators. False. Contact Report 827.
What do you think about the fact that I have been asked several times by different persons what I know about the protocols of the Wise Men of Zion? Of course I know them, but these are really absolute nonsense, which I explain again and again, but there is no peace because of it. These alleged protocols, which are still circulating in the world today, that is to say, under other names, and which fuel the hatred of Jews, that is to say, anti-Semitism again and again, are so idiotic that a human being who really thinks for himself would have to recognize all the nonsense that is contained in these alleged protocols. It is true that they are widespread and tenacious all over the world, but despite the fact that they are really moronic, there are many lunatics who believe in them and therefore indulge in an anti-Semitism that is completely unfounded. Well, the protocols of the Wise Men of Zion are not a forgery, but absolutely invented bullshit and calculated hate-mongering. If it were a forgery, then there would have to be an original, but this never existed and consequently does not exist. And this is not the case with the protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, for these do not correspond in any way to a forgery, but are based on a pure invention and hate-mongering without equal, which could not be more imbecilic, and which truly does not have an original that could have been forged. The protocols of the Elders of Zion are truly devoid of any reference to an alleged original, let alone to reality and its truth, for the whole of the defamatory Judaism and their alleged aspirations to world domination, etc., are nothing but malicious and hateful lies and a fraud of the highest order in the form of a vile and disgraceful invention and fiction, which have no true background whatsoever. If the believers are considered, especially the anti-Semitic believers of the polytheism of Christianity, but also the anti-Semitic fanatics of Islam, then the phony, fantastic, and dubious of the protocols of the Wise Men of Zion is like petrol poured on the fire. This is because these anti-Semitic fanatics are stupid and dumb and thus incapable of thinking for themselves, Consequently, they are unable to realize that everything is a lie and corresponds to nothing but a structureless nonsense. Although he was not even German, but Austrian, the Germans listened to this guy like well-behaved, obedient dogs, as a result of which millions of Jews were murdered, and around 60 million human beings perished in general. Hitler, however, apparently grabbed the word from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and made use of it, namely, the people's awe of might. Our firmly established might will hold the reins of government tightly in its hand, and not run after party leaders and orators who proclaim unrealizable reveries with great verbosity. It will guarantee complete peace and order, which is the whole happiness of human beings. The people will fall on their knees before the radiant wreath of our might and look up to it in shy reverence. True might does not avail itself of a single right, not even the divine. No one will dare to tread too close to it and curtail its fullness of power even by a hair's breadth. Now, the fact that Adolf Hitler made use of this from the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, but contrary to this in his book Mein Kampf, you can see it here. For example, on these pages, 211 and 212, cursed and executed about the Jews, this contradicts itself and proves that this guy was not in his right mind. Moreover, at the same time he indulged in the delusion that the Aryans were the founders of culture on this earth. As he notes on page 321, true founders of culture on this earth, the Aryans themselves.
Adolf Hitler was very badly damaged in terms of consciousness, and that from birth.
But actually, I just wanted to know what you think about the fact that I keep being asked about the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion. For my part, I do not think I am telling the questioners anything more than that everything is a lie, a fabrication, and absolute nonsense. In my opinion, it would be completely wrong for me to go into more detail.
You are correct in doing so, because if you were to explain too much to the questioners, then the anti-Semitism that is still widely held would come up all over again. Earth humans have a tendency to form an opinion, and from it a belief immediately after what is presented to them. So if you were to say too much of what is written in the alleged protocols, which clearly all corresponds to what you called bullshit, then there would be a danger that this would create in certain human beings exactly what is to be avoided.